everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Black Liberation.Tech podcast. I am your host, Dr. Renee Jordan, and today we're going to take a look at a blog post from August 2020, and it is entitled, "Research is Like My Hair. It's a Process." And so in this blog post, I am chatting with my niece and I'm checking in with her. I asked her if it's okay for me to share our dialogue. And so she said it was fine. And so here we go. So me, you're going to be 21 on your birthday. See no evil. Hear no evil, say no evil emojis. How do you feel about turning 21? Niece, I feel like this is going to be an amazing new chapter of my life. Me, yay for amazing. Go, niece, go. Niece, I know, right? Thanks, Auntie Nene. Me, you're welcome, niece. Enjoy the moments. Niece, how's everything with you? Me, things are good. I'm behaving myself and working on my dissertation proposal at the moment. I'm reading a textbook that tells me the procedures in general I need to use for my project and taking notes on what that will look like for my project specifically. It's slow moving, but very helpful, or else I would be lost and sad. Thanks for asking, niece. Wow, that sounds like a lot of work. Me, yes, but it is necessary. The difference between research and non-research anecdotes is that you use systematic processes to design the study as well as collect and analyze data to come up with an explanation or theory of an event or phenomenon. The more clearly that you are able to do so, the stronger your research will be considered by your peers/experts in the field. You want to present a strong case so that others will feel comfortable referencing your work for their work, articles, papers, studies, instructing students, making policy recommendations, and applying best practices in the field. In my case, when designing instruction in class or online. Niece, oh, that makes sense. Do you feel like you're ready? Me, I'm getting there. It's like combing through my hair. I start off at the ends and work my way closer to my scalp until I can go from root to tip. The dissertation proposal ends of my hair gets me prepared to do my project, move closer to the roots so that by the end, I can work my way through my data and analysis, root to tip, without making a huge mess of everything. Niece, that makes sense. Me, asterisk, combing through. Niece, that was a good analogy. Me, thanks, niece. Me, good morning, niece. Do you mind if I post our text about what I'm doing with my proposal on my blog? Niece, good morning. No, I don't mind at all. Me, okay, thank you, niece, you're welcome. As a reflection of that text exchange between my niece and myself, I would like to talk about the different steps that can be included in a qualitative research study. Now, I say qualitative because that's what I did. Now, for quantitative studies, there are steps and processes as well. However, I'm essentially just going to go over the outline of my dissertation. Not in detail. Go ahead and download a copy and see it for yourself, but just a general overview to give you an idea of what goes into it. And then I want to talk about some of the journal articles that I have reviewed and conference presentations that I have reviewed in terms of the strength of the argument that people make when they propose their work for consideration by others. So in my dissertation, it was a 5-chapter dissertation. We had the option of either doing a 5-chapter dissertation or a 2-chapter dissertation. The 2-chapter dissertation would essentially require you to publish 2 articles for consideration by journals. And in so doing, the theory is that if you can get 2 articles published, then you have demonstrated what you needed to in order to say, hey, I'm able to do the work of research as an expert in the field. So I elected to do a 5-chapter dissertation, and it started off with the background. And in the background, I included my research question, purpose, significance of the study, limitations and delimitations, positionality, and the overview of the study. Now, when it comes to research questions, it's important that your research question is something that you can actually do in the amount of time that you have available. And so it's important to narrow down down that question to something that is manageable, once again, in the amount of time that you have available. For me, I worked full time. And initially, when I read an ethnography, I was amazed and I was like, I want to do an ethnography. But then as I learned more about what it takes to do an ethnography, I realized I don't have the time to do that and work full time outside of the space that I'm interested in exploring. And so in place of doing an ethnography, I actually did a case study, but I still use methods of ethnographic data collection and analysis to help me along the way. When I say time constraints and reference a research question, you need to consider how long you have in actual time to collect your data. Will you be able to collect data before a semester? If we're talking about education, before the start of the semester or at the start of a semester, during the middle of the semester or at the end? Will you be able to collect data over the course of the entire semester? In my case, I had the summer. And so what I did, I set up an 8-week schedule and I outlined what I would do for each week. And that included recruitment, that included scheduling orientations, that also included interview time, as well as time for people to upload their examples that they referenced in their interview or they wanted to share with me in order to help me with my data collection process. In addition to interviewing and collecting data, I also provided a time frame in which I would have the transcripts back to my participants so that they could review it and make sure that I got it right. And they also had the opportunity to make any additions or modifications for me to consider. Please note that I did not change my transcript to include what they said. I added what they said as additional data for consideration. Any corrections that they gave or provided, if it was a correction to a name, then there was a single strikeout through that name with the correct name in place. Also, when we're talking about research questions, not only do you have to make sure that you have the time to do the work, you also have to make sure that you can handle what will come about as a result of the data collection. Will you be able to go through all the data that you collect, or will you not have enough time? What cross-section of your data will you consider when you ask your research question and move forward with analysis? Now, when you're doing a thesis or a dissertation, it's important to keep in mind that you don't have to do everything at once, but you should explain as much as possible the decisions that you make so people will understand why you did not analyze everything that you collected. Perhaps you only had enough time to cover certain parts of the data that you collected. It would be great for your readers to know the reason behind it and let them know how they can access the data if they are interested in exploring it further. When we're talking about time and data collection, if you want to know the impact of an intervention on graduation rates, do you have 4 years where you can wait for those who took the intervention during their freshman year to graduate from college or from high school? Do you have 4 years to wait to determine the impact? If you don't, think smaller. Maybe it's not, do they graduate? But maybe the question is, how does it impact them during the following semester? How does it impact them during the same semester? Or how does it impact them following the intervention? Will they consider the things that they learn from the intervention as they move forward? In your background, you want to make sure that you provide the purpose of the study. Now, this purpose reappears throughout your dissertation and it should be worded as such. The purpose of this study is to do X, Y, and Z in order to X, Y, and Z. It should read the same so that people will always go back to the purpose and tie what you're saying to that purpose. You want to make sure that you're staying on track. And in order to make sure that you're staying on track, you need to go back to the purpose in each section of your dissertation to make sure that what you're including is indeed in line with what you're supposed to be focusing on. It's easy to get sidetracked when we're talking about education. There's so much going on, but you need to stay focused and keep it simple in order to help yourself out along the way. The significance of the study is often referred to as so what? What is the point? Why is it important? Why should anyone care? Who should care? Who will this impact? Who will it benefit? What knowledge base will your work add to? Now, it's one thing to repeat a study to find out if it is indeed replicable. That is a relevant type of work. But you also want to make sure that the work you are doing is indeed valuable to someone else other than yourself. Who would it benefit? Yes, it would benefit you, but who else would it benefit? Would it benefit the students? Would it benefit a colleague? Would it benefit someone else who is interested in the phenomenon that you're exploring? What discipline will you add to? Is it just your specific discipline, or will others be able to take advantage of the explanation that you provide of a phenomenon? As far as the limitations and delimitations are concerned, I'm going to tell you to look up what those words mean. But in short, you need to explain, hey, I'm only able to go this far with my work, and it's also going to include X, Y, and Z. It will not include this, that, and the third. Your positionality statement is a disclaimer that allows the reader to understand the perspective that you're coming from as an individual. People, when they look at data, when they collect data, when they analyze data, when they consider a subject matter, when they consider doing a research project, they are not coming up as blank slates under some assumptions. Now, there are some assumptions that say, hey, this research is completely objective, and I'm not going to go into the details of that. That is for you to look up and to find out more about yourself. While others say, hey, I know I'm not walking in here as a blank slate, and this is why. I am an African American woman. I have this experience here. I've taught high school biology. I've served as an instructional technologist. And so when I do this work, I'm coming from a standpoint that I am going to put up front so that you will know, oh, well, she did teach high school biology. She has been an instructional technologist for 3 years. She's had these experiences as an African American woman. Perhaps when she collected the data, reviewed the data, analyzed the data, and discussed the data, her explanation may differ from those who may come from a different background or approach their research with different lenses. In the overview of the study, you want to make sure that you let people know what's coming up so that they can get a preview of what to expect, as well as how to skip around if they want to. Now, when it comes to chapter 2, the review of literature, it's not a regurgitation of everything that you've read. It's also not an annotated bibliography that shows up in the middle of your dissertation. The literature review should help the reader understand what led you to doing this research project in the first place. It should also let people know what work has taken place that helped to determine where your work fits, or reveal how there are holes in the literature that need to be addressed, and how your work helps to fill that hole or void in the literature. Now, when you do your literature review, yes, you're going to go to your discipline. However, it's also important to consider who else from other disciplines have explored a similar phenomenon, if not the same phenomenon, to understand what else have people said about the work. Chances are your discipline is not the only one working on a particular topic. In my case, it wasn't just instructional technologists. It wasn't just those who were in the information and communication technologies field. It also included those who were in STEM. It also included those who taught English classes. Because I was interested in digital literacies, there are other people who talk about literacies that could inform my work, whether that was digital literacy, media literacy, or literacy in general, which also means I wasn't just looking at those who specialized in STEM to inform my work. In addition to digital literacies, I also needed to consider the work of those who looked at how culture plays a role in the instructional design process. Now, as far as chapter 3 is concerned, methodology, I have seen a lot of versions of this section. Now, when reviewing proposals for conferences as well as journals, I've seen people simply write qualitative research study. That would not cut it in my classes that I had with my methodologist, Dr. Janice Fornillier. There's so much that goes into qualitative inquiry that a simple statement that you're doing a qualitative study was not going to be enough in her class. You needed to identify which methodology you were going to use, and you also needed to talk about the different assumptions that are made with those methodologies. Because she is a methodologist, she has a broad spectrum in terms of knowledge as it relates to quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods. So I highly recommend looking up the different types of qualitative inquiry as opposed to simply writing qualitative inquiry. But above all, check with your department, because departments have different expectations and requirements. And in order for them to sign off on your work, they are going to be the ones to determine whether or not what you produce is suitable enough or meets their expectation, so that they will sign off on it and say, yes, this person has done their due diligence. They are demonstrating themselves as an expert in the field of your discipline as it relates to doing research. In chapter 4, I presented my results. What did I get from my participants in terms of the interviews, in terms of the written reflections that they provided, as well as the examples that they provided of them demonstrating their use of digital literacies? Now, in the results, I could not include everything, but I needed to provide enough examples so that the reader would see enough in my results to get a good understanding of how I came about my findings. In the discussion, that was my time to talk. Before that point, I needed to present the study. I needed to present the literature. I needed to present the results and the findings from my data collection and analysis. And in the discussion, I was able finally to talk and use my voice to say, hey, what does this mean as it relates to instructional technology? When I initially provided a draft of my dissertation to my methodologist, she said, Renee, I can tell you worked real hard, but what does this mean? That almost crushed me, but it was the motivation that I needed to go back and look at my work again before my defense. And I'm grateful for that feedback because it made all the sense in the world. So what did my work mean to me and those who would need to know about what it was that I was doing? And from that, I was able to go back to my slides that I prepared for my dissertation defense and change the language that I was using so that it transferred from just being in the theoretical sense of what happened to the practical application of what it means to be an instructional technologist with this information. How does it inform instructional design? How does it inform those who are writing curriculum? Because I said the purpose of the study was to get this information in order to help educators and instructional technologists. And so by taking it from the theoretical of, oh, well, this shows that X, Y, and Z to, well, if you take this, then you're able to do that. that in literal terms. And that made all of the difference in the world. And I will say that I did receive the Outstanding Dissertation Award from the Learning Sciences Department in 2023 for my dissertation. So once again, I'm not going to read it to you. I'm going to say go ahead and download it, check it out for yourself, and let me know what you think. Now, something else that I included in my dissertation were many tables as well as a good number of figures. Now, the reason I included many tables is because I have a talent for taking a whole lot of information and presenting it in a way that's visual to capture what I'm saying in fewer words than it would take for me to sit there and explain it. And so when I was doing my dissertation, I kept in mind my nieces and my nephews. I know, and myself, if I picked up a 261-page document, I know that the first thing I'm going to do is flip through and take a look at the tables and the images, or figures, if you will, to see if I want to read what's around it, or at least to get a picture or a short version of what's happening before I decide whether or not to read what it's talking about. And so in my list of tables, I had 20 tables. For my figures, I had 9 figures. So when you're doing your thesis, your dissertation, or writing or making a poster presentation, make sure that you capture things in ways that are visual. For those of us who like to pick through work or get the gist of something by viewing a visual as opposed to diving into the lengthy paper first. Some of us like to take the shortcut and then work our way back and take a gander at what you have written. All right, so this next part, I said I was going to share some reviews that I've done. And so the first one, when I say share some reviews, I'm not going to read the actual documents that I reviewed, but I'll share my comments that I made as a reviewer. So this is one that was for a journal, and I simply said, I recommend that the editor consider accepting the paper after minor revisions, which would require the author to provide a working illustration of critical cine-ethnography. While the article is technically sound regarding the writing skills of the author and explanation of critical cine-ethnography, it lacks the thick description promised by the chosen qualitative method of analysis. The author should consider referencing a single study that used critical ethnography throughout this article in order to have a point of reference on which to build out for the reader how critical cine-ethnography could look. In so doing, the author would add another dimension to the article and pose to readers a working illustration of critical cine-ethnography on which to reflect as they read how the systematic process unfolds. This referenced example can also serve as a workaround for disseminating critical cine-ethnography in action before the author is ready to publish the study in progress. So that's a review that I provided. And so sometimes when you are doing something different or that has not been used frequently, it's good to provide an example of something that might be in close proximity to help people understand where you're coming from and where you're going with the information that you're providing. Now, the next 3 are conference proposals that I reviewed, and here is the list of things that I needed to consider from the reviewer guidelines. I needed to consider relevance to the conference, originality, clarity, /quality of English, references, length of paper, and potential value. So I'm not going to go into details there, but one thing I will say is that whenever you're submitting to a conference, you need to make sure that your proposal touches on the theme or the topic that they want to share out during the conference. Does that mean that your entire study has to center around it? Not necessarily, but you need to demonstrate how your study is relevant or how your study touches on the main topic, the main focus, the theme. The whole purpose of having a conference theme is so that there's some uniformity on what is being shared during the conference. And so that way, people are able to see how those either in similar or different disciplines are touching on the work tied to the conference theme. So I'll start off with the shortest review first. All right, so here's the shortest one. I do not recommend acceptance of this paper. The authors should consider including more details on the study. The brief paper does not provide enough information on the need for the research, the intervention, and methods of analysis. So from that, I want to encourage you to make sure that you're providing enough detail, even if it is a proposal or a work in progress, meaning that the study is not done yet, but by the time you get to the conference, the full paper will be done, meaning that you've completed the study, that you've collected the data, and that you've analyzed the data. So when you write your proposal, and let's say it's a work in progress, you want to mention that it's a work in progress, but you want to make sure that you have enough detail to say, hey, I'm not just trying to hold a space on the program. I'm really going to be able to present some work. Here is what I plan to do. These are the anticipated results. Let's say you have some data, but you haven't finished collecting your data. You can say what you are gathering based upon what you've collected so far, and then you intend to provide a full discussion of results at the time of the conference. So my next review of a conference proposal, same conference. This one says, I do not recommend the acceptance of this proposal. Relevance to the conference. Think about how a specific methodology could introduce an innovative lens or perspective to the study. What is innovative about this study beyond the technology? Originality. What information could the authors gain as it relates to reading comprehension or other reading practices from this study? What is the need for the research? What problem do you want to address? Why is this important beyond silent student discussions? References. The authors should consider more from the literature on student texting as it relates to reading. Potential value. How did you measure whether or not something was natural? What were the criteria for measuring whether or not the texting came natural? Why is it important to consider whether or not it came natural? How is this related to improving reading skills? So in this review, I provided questions that would hopefully lead the author to a point that would provide more information for the reader if they were to consider including their responses to these questions. My niche when it comes to reviewing is finding holes in logic as well as asking questions to help redirect someone to their own work and what might help them along the way. All right, now here is my third review for the same conference. And just so you all don't think that I just tell everybody no, this one is actually a recommendation for acceptance. So, recommendation. I recommend the acceptance of this proposal. Comments to author. Relevance to the conference. To strengthen the significance, the authors should consider what separates this study from research found in the literature on digital storytelling. Originality. What theory or methodology will the author use to gain an innovative perspective from the data? Clarity of English. The quality of English in this paper was very good. References. The authors situated the study within the literature. What does the literature have to say about the theories of learning or method of data analysis? Length of paper. The length of this paper was very good. Potential value. value? What are the broader implications of this research on mid-level or large-scale educational programs? Reason for judgment. The information presented in this paper should be of value to a broad audience. Now, you might say, Renee, you recommended that for acceptance, but you still had questions. Yes, because the paper was a good fit and was of a high quality, that doesn't mean that there's still not work to do. The benefit of being able to get comments back from the reviewer before the actual conference, or getting comments back from someone reviewing your journal article that says revise and resubmit, is because they want to see it reach a higher level of clarity, a higher level of quality, a higher level of strength, a higher level of potential value to the discipline, to the readers, and to the scholarship in general. The reason you want your peers to review it is because they have an idea of what's happening in the research world. They are actively reading, actively participating, actively engaging in the work of research, and have an understanding of what to expect when you go to a conference. Now, I could have just said, I recommend this paper for acceptance to the conference, and let them go to the conference, present their work as is, and then have people asking them a bunch of questions that I could have asked them earlier. And so I did. So when I review a paper, not only do I say what's good about it, but I'm also going to give recommendations as far as how can you strengthen your argument so that when you show up at the conference, you would have had the opportunity to either address it and therefore enhance the paper as a result, so that when you submit it to the conference proceedings, you have a stronger paper, or you can anticipate what questions will be asked. And perhaps you don't address them in your presentation, but when someone asks you the questions that I've asked you in my review of your paper, you already have answers to share. That would be a great thing to do as well. With all that being said, I want to encourage you to do the work of research. Recognize that it is a process. It is labor intensive, and you should consider the time you have as an individual, the time it would take in order to complete the project. Will it be 4 months? Will it be 8 weeks? Will it take a year or 2 to complete? Think about that before you get started and decide for yourself. Do you have the time? Also, do you have the capacity? Will you be collecting a lot of data and not have the capacity to go through it all? And as a result, will need to extract a cross section of your data so that you will be able to take a look at an amount of data that is manageable within your time limitations. Think about those things. If you're writing a qualitative research paper for your dissertation or thesis, think about what you want to do. And when I say that, I mean, do you want to do a case study? Do you want to do an ethnography? What are the frameworks that you're going to consider? What are the philosophies? What are the assumptions? What's the focus of your work? What is the purpose of your work? How will you explain the significance of your study? So what? Who cares? What about your work is important? Why should we care? Why is it important? Why should we think about what you have to say about a phenomenon when we're moving forward with education or with anything else? I also want to take this time to encourage you to submit your work to conferences and journals. Remember, it's those types of things that you need to include on your CV that will separate you from the next person. So have you submitted? Have you reviewed? Have you served as a graduate research assistant? Do you have work as a graduate teaching assistant? What have you done outside of going through your coursework in order to help you prepare for your thesis or dissertation? Will your thesis or dissertation proposal be the first proposal that you write? I want to encourage you to do research that gets submitted for the review by your peers in your discipline and others before it's time for you to do your thesis or dissertation proposal. That way you can have practice getting your paper together, getting your presentation together, submitting it for others to consider, looking at their feedback, considering what they have to say about your work, and revamping or retooling, reevaluating, rewriting, presenting your work so that you're making a stronger argument based on what they have to say. Once again, thank you for listening to another episode of the Black Liberation.Tech podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Renee Jordan. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share, rate, and review the podcast to help it become more discoverable. And until next time, take care. Bye-bye.